6 people went into the woods alone. All of them had cameras rolling. What those cameras captured: unexplained knocking with nobody outside, a body floating in a river, gunshots fired at a campsite, and something pale and tall retreating into a graveyard forest is exactly why some of them never went back. Encounter 1. The hut that kept knocking back. January 3rd, 2024. Deep in the Scottish wilderness, a man who had spent over 400 consecutive days living outdoors set off on what should have been a completely ordinary overnight stay in a remote bothy, a small, unlocked shelter maintained for name. Hikers and wild campers across the Scottish Highlands, he was not new to this. He had documented over 2 years of solo wilderness living on his channel, covering everything from remote camping experiences to exploring forgotten places. He had slept in hundreds of locations across that time. He had faced cold nights, isolation, and the particular silence of wilderness that presses in differently than urban quiet. He had never shown fear on camera. That context matters for everything that follows. The hike to the bothy was uneventful. January meant quiet bushland, winter cold, and the kind of solitude he actively preferred. He had carried wood with him in case the shelter had none. He knew the location, a small hut called the White Lagan near Loch Dee, and had researched it before setting out. By his own account, he was relaxed and looking forward to a simple night. He arrived, checked the interior, found it empty, and began settling in. Shortly afterward, a family passed through, a father with his children, exploring the area, who mentioned they might stay the night as well. They left without committing either way. Jonathan was likely alone. He made dinner, haggis with ketchup and mustard, simple by choice, exactly the kind of meal that belongs to that lifestyle. He got the fire going. He settled in front of it with music planned and no agenda beyond a comfortable night in an interesting location. Then the knocking started. Someone was at the door. Distinct, deliberate knocking, not a branch or a window vibration from wind. He went outside immediately. Nobody was there. He checked around the shelter. Nothing. No footprints in the direction someone would have retreated. No lights in the distance. No sound of movement through the undergrowth. He went back inside and tried to dismiss it. Then it happened again. Same knocking. Same result when he checked. Nobody outside. He began filming his reaction, and the uncertainty in his face was genuine. This was not performed unease for an audience. This was a man who had lived outdoors for over 2 years alone, who described himself as someone who did not scare easily, genuinely not understanding what was happening. The third time the knocking came, he went outside with more urgency. Still nothing. The forest around the bothy sat completely still. No wind to explain structural sounds. The family he had spoken to earlier did not seem like the type to play games in the dark. A father with young children, passing through, who had shown no interest in staying. He turned his music up. He told his viewers he was going to enjoy the fire and not think about it. The camera caught his eyes moving toward the window periodically, even as he spoke with forced calm. The rest of the night remained quiet. In the morning, he recorded a composed update acknowledging the strangeness without dramatizing it, noting that he was not a believer in ghosts and had no explanation, confirming that when he checked the area, he found no evidence of anyone having been outside. He said he would not be returning to that particular location. For a man whose entire identity was built around returning to remote wild places without hesitation, that single statement carried weight that no dramatic conclusion could have matched. Something happened at that bothy on January 3rd, 2024. What it was remains entirely unknown. Encounter 2. A fishing trip and a body in the water. 6 years. That is how long a kayak fishing content creator had spent on the water, documenting peaceful journeys through rivers and lakes in the American South. 6 years of early mornings, still water, and the particular meditative quality that fishing from a kayak produces when everything is quiet and nothing is wrong. December 13th. 2024 was supposed to be another morning like all the others. He had invited his friend John to join him on Lake Emery near the Little Tennessee River. The conditions were exactly right, cold and misty, the kind of morning where fog sits close to the water and every sound travels cleanly. They loaded the kayaks, strapped their GoPros to their chests, and pushed out onto the water. For the first few hours, everything was exactly as it should have been. They cast their lines, they shared stories. The current guided them through the winding bends of the river into water they had paddled before, familiar and calm. Then they saw the hand, above the waterline, a hand sticking up from the water near the bank. And near it a face, decomposed, clearly real. The moment their minds registered what they were looking at, the footage becomes something different. 2 men captured in the specific stunned silence that precedes the full comprehension of something terrible. The radio call to emergency services was captured live. Listening to it is one of the more genuinely distressing audio experiences available in the outdoor content space, because there is no performance in it. Just two men trying to describe something to a dispatcher while their voices shake with the effort of staying functional. They confirmed their location. They described what they could see. They waited. As they waited, John noticed something else. Near the boat ramp further up the riverbank, a small pair of Crocs, child-sized, just sitting there. No child walking away from them. No context for how they had arrived at that specific spot on the bank of a river where a body was floating 20 meters away. Police arrived and confirmed everything. A young girl. The shoes appeared to belong to the victim. The investigation began immediately, and the peaceful lake that had been a constant in this creator's life became a crime scene surrounded by tape and law enforcement personnel. He stayed to give his statement. He uploaded the footage with genuine uncertainty about whether doing so was appropriate. His comments section reflected that uncertainty back to him, in the form of thousands of messages from viewers who appreciated the documentation and grieved for the girl simultaneously. In the weeks that followed, he struggled to return to the water. His videos continued, but something fundamental had shifted in them, a gravity behind his usual calm tone that had not been there before. A place that had served as his escape from the pressures of ordinary life had become the location of the worst thing he had ever witnessed. That does not unhappen. The footage exists. The girl existed. And the shoes sitting on the bank with nobody walking away from them remain the detail that stays with every viewer who watches this video long after everything else has faded. Encounter 3. Something circling the tent at 1 a.m. April 2019. A solo backcountry camper documented his overnight trip into the mountains the way he always did, methodically, calmly, with the quiet competence of someone who had spent significant time in remote terrain. The hike up was uneventful. He arrived at his chosen campsite as the sun was lowering, set up his tent, got a fire going, and tried his hand at spoon carving while the light lasted. Around 9 o'clock, he turned the camera off to sleep. Normal end to a normal evening. Less than an hour later, he was awake. The sound that woke him was unlike anything he could categorize from prior experience in the wilderness. He described it carefully and with obvious frustration at the inadequacy of the comparison. Something guttural, somewhere between a pig and something else, with a specific quality to the call that reminded him involuntarily of the communication sounds the velociraptors made in Jurassic Park. Not because it was cinematic or dramatic, but because of the specific pattern of the call, the way it seemed to carry information, seemed directed rather than reflexive. It came from a distance. He stayed still and listened. Eventually it stopped and he managed to return to sleep. Then, at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, something began circling his tent, not approaching from a single direction and retreating, circling. A complete, deliberate perimeter movement that started on one side of the tent and moved methodically around the full circumference. He was awake and recording before the circuit was complete. He could hear the movement, clearly footfalls in the undergrowth. Something with mass moving through the terrain around him at a pace that suggested purpose rather than random foraging. He swept his flashlight through the tent fabric, trying to identify what was outside. He could see nothing through the material. He recorded himself listening, recording the sounds, trying to count what he was hearing. He believed there were at least 2 or 3 separate animals. The sounds seemed to come from more than one direction simultaneously, as if the circling was being performed by a group rather than a single animal. Then he swept his flashlight out through the tent, opening across the tree line. What he did not notice in that moment, but what his camera captured with complete clarity, were eyes. In the bottom left corner of the frame, the fiery white reflection characteristic of canine animals at night. Not one set, 2. Watching him steadily from the darkness as the flashlight passed across them, they did not flinch, they did not retreat. They simply watched from exactly the distance they had chosen. He closed the tent. He lay still. He listened to the sounds continue for a period before they eventually faded. He managed to sleep and woke the following morning to describe the audio experience for his viewers. The guttural call, the circling sounds, the sense of being observed. Wolves and coyotes are the most probable explanation for the white reflective eyes at that altitude at 1 in the morning. Both species rarely attack humans but become significantly more dangerous if they have young nearby and feel cornered or threatened. A solo camper in a tent in the dark, surrounded by animals he cannot see, with a flashlight scanning past eyes that are watching him without blinking. This is precisely the scenario where rare becomes possible. He packed up in the morning and headed out. No follow-up was ever posted clarifying what the camera had captured. Whether he ever watched his own footage carefully enough to notice the eyes in the frame is unknown. Encounter 4. The Graveyard and the Pail. Figure June 12, 2024. a solo paranormal exploration creator who regularly documented visits to cemeteries, haunted locations, and abandoned places, ventured out to a specific graveyard after hearing local rumors that grave robbers operated there after dark. He had been in worse situations. He was not particularly alarmed going in. He arrived after dark. The first unusual element was a light at the edge of the cemetery, distant, visible for a moment, then immediately extinguished. Not a gradual fade, switched off deliberately. He noted it and moved deeper into the grounds. The voices came next, indistinct, coming from somewhere up the hill, present from multiple directions simultaneously. The kind of audio environment that is difficult to rationalize when you are standing alone in a graveyard at night, with no visible source. He moved toward where the sounds seemed loudest. Nobody was there. Then the vehicle appeared. No headlights, moving slowly along the perimeter of the cemetery from the far side. It drove toward the area where he was positioned, stopped completely with its lights now shining directly at him from a distance, sat there for a period that felt considerably longer than it was, and then drove away in darkness with its headlights off again. He waited for the cemetery to feel clear and re-entered the grounds. Almost immediately, the whistle came, a specific, deliberate whistle that seemed to come from the tree line at the far edge of the cemetery grounds. He moved toward it with his night vision camera recording. Something was at the edge of the forest trail, tall, pale in the night vision with a pallor that was not the characteristic green-white of ambient night vision footage, but something brighter, more present. Thin in proportion, the wrong kind of thin, the kind that registers as wrong before the reasoning mind catches up to explain why. It was standing at the trail entrance watching him. Sitting in his car, he tried to describe what he had seen, human-like in overall shape. Wrong in every specific detail that proximity reveals. The whistle before it appeared the same whistle he had heard earlier, possibly indicating that whatever was making the sound had been tracking his movements through the cemetery before deciding to show itself. He drove home without returning to investigate further. He has not returned to that location. The identity of what stood at the trail entrance on June 12, 2024, has never been established. Encounter: 5 gunshots, fired at the campsite, December 30th, 2023. 3 content creators who regularly documented paranormal investigations together set up camp in a dense forest for an overnight stay. The original plan was a spirit box session and some general exploration of the atmosphere. The spirit box produced nothing unusual. What came instead was not paranormal. It was considerably more immediately dangerous. They had been at the campsite for a few hours when the footsteps began sounds in the snow around the perimeter of the camp, close enough to hear clearly but with no visible source when they searched. Then a vehicle appeared at the edge of the tree line with no headlights, moving slowly along the access road that ran near their site. Then the shots. Multiple. Close. Not the distant report of someone hunting at range close enough to determine direction, close enough that the sound arrived with the kind of physical immediacy that removes any ambiguity about what it is. They did not discuss it. They grabbed what their hands found and ran, left the fire burning, left equipment scattered across the site, got to the truck and drove without stopping to assess what was behind them. Sitting in the vehicle at a safe distance, they tried to determine whether the shots had been intended to hit them or to drive them out. They could not answer that question. Nobody who has reviewed the footage has been able to answer it definitively either. Whether the 2 parties were connected, the vehicle and the people moving through the forest on foot, was never established. Whether they were targeting the 3 campers specifically, or were engaged in something unrelated to them that night in those woods, was never determined. The 3 of them left safely. What was happening in that forest on the night of December 30th, 2023, has never been explained. Encounter: 6 screams from the tree line that nobody could explain. This one is different from the others on this list. The others involved isolated individuals encountering something they could not explain and then leaving. This encounter involves people who could not leave because the encounter was happening at their home. A couple had recently moved to a property on the edge of a dense forest in Gainesville. They had specifically chosen a location near the woods, the quiet, the proximity to nature, the sense of separation from urban density. Their first evening in the house was spent unpacking and settling in. The particular tired satisfaction of new beginnings. They fell asleep to the sounds of the forest. In the early hours of that first night, a scream pierced the dark. High-pitched, clear, unmistakably human in quality, not an animal call that a tired mind might misread as human, but something that both of them, woken from sleep, independently registered as a person screaming from deep inside the trees. By the time they reached the window, the forest had gone completely silent. Whatever had made the sound was not making it anymore. They searched for explanations the next day. Screech owls are capable of producing sounds that unsettle people unfamiliar with the call. Foxes, particularly vixens during mating season, produce screams that have been described as unnervingly human. They researched both. Neither matched what they had heard. The recording they eventually made of the sound was compared to documented wildlife calls by people who left comments with genuine expertise. The match was not convincing. And then something else emerged in the comments section that changed the nature of the encounter entirely. Other residents from the surrounding area. Not one or two people saying they had heard something similar, multiple local residents independently describing the same experience, the same hours, the same general direction from their respective properties. Different gardens, same tree line, same pre-dawn timing. A pattern of unexplained screaming from a specific section of forest that had been going on for months and that nobody had reported to any authority, because nobody individually felt they had sufficient grounds to make a report. This is the element that makes the sixth encounter different from the first five. The bothy knocking, the body in the water, the circling animals, the graveyard figure, the gunshots in the forest, all of those were singular events that happened to specific people in specific places. This was ongoing, repeated, corroborated by an entire neighborhood of people who had each privately concluded that they were hearing something they could not explain and had not compared notes until a comment section on a social media video gave them a shared space to do so. Whatever was in that section of forest was making that sound regularly enough that multiple residents had adjusted to it, incorporated it into their understanding of what living near those woods meant, without ever resolving what the sound was. The couple never identified the source. The residents who came forward in the comments never identified the source. The specific section of trees that produced the screams continued to produce them. Something in those woods made that sound. It kept coming back. And eventually enough people had heard it from enough separate locations that the only honest conclusion available is that the sound was real, was repeated, and has never been explained. Bonus eyes in the dark. The solo camper who never noticed he was being watched. This one does not involve a dramatic confrontation or an unexplained phenomenon. It involves something that is in some ways more unsettling: a man who was being watched and had absolutely no idea. A solo camper in Canada car camping at a remote location west of Chapleau, Ontario. With no cell phone signal, woke at 3:30 in the morning to the sound of something pacing around his tent. Not approaching and retreating. Pacing. The specific repetitive back and forth movement of an animal that has identified something of interest and is processing how to engage with it. It eventually stopped and moved away. He slept. In the morning he packed up and left. He never determined what had been outside. What makes this encounter worth including is not the dramatic quality of the footage, but the specific quality of the patience it documents. A man alone in the dark in the Black Bear capital of Canada. No phone signal, something large circling his tent for the better part of an hour, keeping himself completely still and functional throughout. The footage is quiet. The threat was real. The discipline required to produce that footage while lying inside it is not nothing. A man alone in a Scottish bothy with knocking that nobody was ever making. A body in the water of a lake a content creator had spent 6 years believing was peaceful, eyes watching from the dark that a camera caught and the man holding it never saw. A pale figure at the edge of a forest trail that retreated without making a sound. Gunshots in a forest at a campsite where two separate groups were approaching from different directions. A neighborhood of people who had each been hearing screams from the same section of trees for months and had not compared notes until a comment section brought them together. And a man who spent 45 minutes in the dark listening to something circle his tent without knowing what it was. 7 encounters, all of them on camera, all of them documented. All of them still without a complete explanation. Drop a comment telling us which one you could not rationalize your way past. Check the end screen for more outdoor encounters sitting there right now.